I'm Chandra Thomas Whitfield of Colorado Public Radio, and I want to welcome you to the Solution Studio at Metropolitan State University. Now it's time to welcome Democratic incumbent Senator Michael Bennet. Welcome.
Thanks, Chandra. It's great to be here.
Let's turn to our student panelists who would like to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Tarek Elmcantor. I am a senior studying computer information systems with a concentration in security.
Hi, my name is Naomi Hawkes. I'm a senior here at MSU Denver, and I'm a biology major with a minor in geographic information systems.
Hi, my name is Nayeli Sanchez. I'm a fourth-year student here at MSU Denver, pursuing a major in business management.
Hi, my name is Brian Bartholomew. I'm a senior here at MSU, and my concentration is chemistry with the focus of education.
Thank you all for participating today for this show. We'll have 3 challenges. The senator will have 5 minutes to respond, and then we'll have 1 round of questions and 1 round of follow-up questions. You will have 1 minute to answer the student questions. Senator Bennet, our student focus group research reveals a perception that home ownership sits at an unreachable rung on the ladder of economic security, even for students dedicated to attaining a 4-year degree and pursuing a stable career. This is not just a national issue, it's also one in Colorado. What will you do in the next 6 years to lead and engage the federal government to expand access to home ownership and affordable housing options?
I'm glad, Chandra, this was one of the issues that you guys, that the students figured out as such an issue in Colorado, because there is no workforce housing left in Colorado. Before I was in this job, I was the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, and I never met a teacher in Denver who didn't live in Denver, because why wouldn't you want to live near where you taught? And that's because just 15 years ago, Denver was that affordable. I was visited recently by the classroom teacher of the year in Colorado. She's from Glenwood Springs on the western slope of Colorado. And she said to me, she wasn't complaining, but just in passing, she said 70 to 80% of the teachers in her middle school and in her high school have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to live in Glenwood Springs. That's not sustainable. I mean, teaching is a hard job to do on its own. The idea that you have to work 2 and 3 jobs to teach is just not sustainable. And there are many places in the state, I think virtually everywhere in the state, where the workforce can't afford to live, where there isn't affordable housing, and people have to travel great distances to be able to get there. It's one of the reasons why we have such trouble with early childhood education and daycare in Colorado, because people can't afford to live there. So I put together a group of people from all over Colorado, all walks of life, about 40 people, realtors to people that do housing policy in our communities, to ask them to meet together over a 6-month period and come up with suggestions about what we should do. And their suggestions basically boiled down to, we need to build more housing. We need to cut red tape so that we can build housing faster than we have. And we've got to be creative about the construction of housing, using new methods of manufacturing housing and using manufactured housing itself. And I'm in the midst, to answer the question about what we need to do going forward, I'm in the midst of writing legislation that would take the recommendations that have been made here from the people in Colorado and try to create a set of incentives from the federal level that would help push innovation and quicker decision making and more affordable housing as well. During the COVID pandemic, we had an eviction crisis in our state and across the country, and I wrote the first bill in Congress to study evictions, because that also has become a crisis here. We haven't passed that yet, but because of the American Rescue Plan, 30,000 people who would have been evicted from their homes in Colorado weren't evicted. But I say to people all the time that, I don't want Colorado to become Seattle or San Francisco, where nobody can afford to, who's working there can actually afford to live there, and only the very wealthy can afford to live there. There's a broader context for all this that's happening, if I have a minute or so left, which is that we've had an economy for 50 years in this country and in Colorado where all the benefits have basically gone to the top 10% of Americans. And 9 out of 10 Americans have not seen their incomes rise. And so in Colorado, the cost of housing, of healthcare, of higher education, of early childhood education is so great that people are having a hard time saving, and they feel like their kids are going to live more diminished lives than they're living, and they already feel like, you know, they're making choices that their parents and grandparents didn't have to make. And for the generation that's graduating from MSU, that's created a lot of concern about whether or not people can even stay in Colorado because of the lack of affordable housing and other kind of cost pressures that are making it difficult for people who might today be living with their family, you know, to be able to live on their own or to be able to start a small business. I'll leave you with one last example. This is again from the Western Slope, a rural part of Colorado in Montrose, a small manufacturer who said to me, his big competitive disadvantage with China is he can't afford housing that doesn't cost 51% of his income. And so he and his employees are actually sleeping on the shop floor in Montrose. We've got to do better than that.
Now let's turn to our student panel. Let's start with Brian.
There is a significant employment gap between a deaf and hearing individual. And in the United States, deaf candidates like myself are perceived too disabled to work for any of the industry, which cause a huge effect on affordable housing. And what are you going to be able to do with the American Disability Act?
Could I ask you?
And 1 second,
Sure.
sir. Do you understand the situation with the people that are having disability trying to find housing that is affordable to them and best fits them?
I wanted to ask you, can I ask a question, or am I not allowed to ask a question?
You can answer.
I was just going to ask you, could you describe a little bit the connection that you're talking about between the gap in terms of working and housing? Is it that the income of disabled people is lower and therefore the housing is less affordable?
It's basically the gap is you have laws that allows company to pay me far beyond minimum wage,
Right.
so I cannot afford a house.
Right.
And then also at the same time, if I apply for the social disability, I am limited to only $2,000 a month. And so if I get more than $2,000 in my bank account, I lose that benefit. And then
I got it. Absolutely. This is a huge issue. These so-called cliffs, you know, where if you have a certain amount of benefit, then you lose your opportunity to be able to have any kind of subsidies or help with what you're trying to do. We have the same problem with Medicaid as well in our country and in the state. And I think one of the things we got to do is change policy so that we don't have these cliffs where you just hit the cliff and you fall off the cliff. There should be a way of being able to let people have that subsidy run so that we don't disincentivize people from working, because that's, you know, what happens is people are earning too much and therefore they can't get the benefit and therefore they can't afford housing. And whether it's housing and whether it's people with disabilities or whether it's health care, we should want people to work in this country, and we should make it easier for them to work, not harder for them to work. That's why people should not lose their benefits because they're earning too much, and they shouldn't lose their health care because they're earning too much. So thank you for that question.
Okay, now we turn to Nayeli.
As a senior in my last year of college, like I mentioned, I'm constantly looking for jobs that, one, will pay me enough to afford housing and be able to maintain myself throughout the year. And with my parents also being immigrants and not fully being able to fulfill this American dream of owning a home, I'm left with fulfilling that dream and hopefully being able to afford a home. And so we're constantly hearing this idea of cutting the red tape. And so how, in making sure that the increase in inflation with the cost of materials, the way that these materials are being brought to each state is constantly going up. So my question is, what will you do to clear the increase in these material costs and the travel to make sure that it isn't just affordable to own a home, but to be able to afford rent?
Right. So in terms of housing, the cost of materials have gone through the roof, and they've gone through the roof all over Colorado, and in some ways that are really, really discouraging, like the poor people who lost their homes in the Marshall Fire in Boulder County last year on the last day of the year. Imagine trying to find a contractor to build a house or find the materials to build a house when you've got that many people in one place that need to do it. And in a sense, we're facing that as a state. I just will be honest, there's very little that I can do in terms of federal policy to be able to make those materials less expensive than they are. But I do think one of the recommendations from the group that I put together is that we ought to use construction innovation and manufactured homes as a way of trying to cut the cost down and also cut the time of delivery of housing in our state down. We have some manufactured housing builders in Colorado right now that are new businesses that have started that I think potentially could create really good paying jobs for people as well. So that's another good benefit.
But unfortunately, we're out of time, so we're going to
Okay.
move on to Naomi.
Okay.
We appreciate all your answers here, and I appreciate your opinions, and they're definitely very valid, but I don't think they're going to answer this next question. I think that you strongly believe in structure. I did recall that you are a lawyer as well. And I think that a huge setback that we have in our education system is that they're not teaching us financial literacy. And that's really like a big stepping stone to owning a home, figuring out rent, just surviving in life. They teach us y equals mx plus b. Nobody knows and has to use that at all any point during their day in their regular lives. So my question to you is, what are you going to do given that you have the resources, all the data that you need? What's a step-by-step, point-by-point structure that you want to build or propose to, like, Congress or whatever in the education system to build up that way from, the youth up into like young adults, in building that sense of financial literacy that will help them better be able to figure out each economy as it changes into buying a home or affording rent, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it is really important for young people to have the benefit of financial literacy classes. And when I was the superintendent of schools in Denver, there was an attempt to do that. I don't know what the schools district is doing now, but I do think that, I've never been a believer that we should mandate from Washington, D.C. what the curriculum should look like in every single district. So I want to just be honest and clear about that. I will say this, though. I think that this country should be able to say to young people in this country that if you graduate with a high school diploma in America, you're going to graduate with the skills to earn a living wage, not just the minimum wage. Because if you start at the minimum wage when you graduate from high school, it will take you the rest of your life to catch up to where you could have been if you start at the living wage at the very beginning, and then you can make a decision later or then. I mean, to me, young people should be able to decide, I'm going to college, or I'm going to go take a job with the living wage. What they should not be left in is a minimum wage job that does not put them on the financial trajectory that you're talking about so they can afford housing or anything else in the society.
Now, Tarek.
Thank you, Sandra. I grew up in Lakewood, Colorado, and spent many of my summers in Golden hiking and swimming in Clear Creek with my schoolmates. We spent summer nights at Lookout Mountain, stargazing for hours. Those same kids I grew up with now are having to leave what we call home because of the insane housing market. Senator, imagine you are an advocate for Colorado. What do you say to native Coloradans who have to leave just to find a home?
The last few years are the first time that I've been in this job where I've heard people say exactly what you said, and it's a tragedy. It's tragic. I mean, people are so proud to live in Colorado, and the quality of life in general is so high for all the reasons that you were just talking about Clear Creek and being out underneath the stars. You know, I think we've got to solve this problem. We have to build more housing in Colorado. This fall, on the ballot in Colorado, there is an initiative here in this state to um,
30 seconds.
to take $300 million and put it to work to build affordable housing in Colorado. And the requirements of, it's called Proposition 123 or ballot issue 123. And the requirements are that communities that want that funding have to build 3% more housing every year, affordable housing every year, and they have to create a 90-day approval process to do that. And
We're out of time.
and we think it's 10,000 units a year is what we're going to build, 150,000 units over the next 15 years. So don't leave Colorado, because if we pass that, we're going to have affordable housing here. Thank you for having me.
And now we will take follow-up questions from our student panel.
Like many of those affordable housing that you mentioned, are they going to be very ADA friendly for people like myself? I have gone to some low-end housing that are affordable, and I'm just like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Because this house doesn't fit
Right.
the original tenants.
Yeah, they need to be. They need to be accessible, and you know, some of the most accessible housing that I've seen in Colorado is the Habitat for Humanity housing that has been built in our city and across the state. And if they can do it, I think everybody ought to be able to do it.
All right, looks like it is time to continue with our student panel. Any more follow-up questions?
Not on my end.
I have one. I appreciate, everything that you're saying, and, that we appreciate you expressing your beliefs to us. But personally, for me, I don't think you answered my question at all. So I'm going to follow it up with, what structures, development systems are you trying to, I guess, implement whenever you can get the chance to work with these education systems? How are you going to, for instance, involve like superintendents or, just like schools in general? Or how are you going to, like, what bills are you going to try to propose to, Congress, things like that? Like, what is the actual plan? Because we get what we need here in America for like housing and things like that, but we don't know what's the plan.
Well, the actual plan that I have is to provide, is a bill that I've written. I'm sorry that I didn't answer your question to your satisfaction, but a bill that I've written that would say that if your community in America wants to align the middle schools and the high schools and the private businesses and nonprofits around the idea that you're going to graduate kids ready to earn a living wage when they graduate from high school, not just the minimum wage. And I've seen it in places outside Chicago and other places like that, that the federal government will pay for the fixed cost of putting that together, so that, because there is nobody whose job it is, whose day job it is, to do that kind of alignment, to make sure that the sixth grade curriculum is aligned with what kids are graduating from the 12th grade, or that sixth graders know that they're going to know by the time they get to the 12th grade what skills and knowledge they need to be able to earn that living wage. I've seen it in Denver public schools. We've got kids that are doing apprenticeships like people at Metro State do. They're at school 3 days a week, at the apprenticeship 2 days a week. They're getting paid while they're there. And then when they graduate, they're earning a living wage at that employer. My bill would say we should do that across the country, and that the federal government would pay for it. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed it the first
You're good.
time.
You're good.
Any more follow-up from our student panelists? All right, it looks like it's time for challenge number 2. Senator Bennet, Americans know our immigration system is in need of meaningful reform. How will you get Congress to finally pass comprehensive immigration reform, and what would be the major components of this plan?
And this is really a very personal issue for me. My mother is an immigrant to the United States, and my grandparents were immigrants to the United States. When they came here, they were Polish Jews who survived the Holocaust in Warsaw, and with an aunt, they were the only ones who survived. They went to Stockholm, Sweden for a year, and then they went to Mexico City for a year, and then they came to the United States, the only country in the world where they felt they could rebuild their shattered lives. And I've traveled the state widely, And I've yet to meet an immigrant who's got a stronger accent than my grandparents had. And I've never met more patriotic people than my grandparents were, not because they thought this country was perfect, far from it. They thought the country had a way of fixing its mistakes and that they could be part of that from the moment they became citizens of this country. This is why I became part of the Gang of Eight in 2013 that wrote the comprehensive immigration bill that passed the Senate with 68 votes. And the components of that bill, John McCain led the Republicans. I was one of the 4 Democrats. And I believe when we finally stop beating ourselves with, or creating these self-inflicted wounds that we're creating on immigration, the bill we pass is going to look a lot like what we passed in 2013, a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people that are here, the most progressive DREAM Act that had ever been conceived of, much less passed on the floor of the Senate. All the visa issues, the agriculture issues, all the stuff that's so unpredictable for business and for people that want to work here, we need to deal with that. And we did deal with that in that bill. And we had $40 billion of border security in that bill so the American people would know that we had a secure and humane border. That's what we have to get back to. Tragically, that bill never got a vote in the House of Representatives. We passed it out of the Senate, as I said, never got a vote in the House because the Tea Party, the so-called Freedom Caucus, just exercised a veto. And it's my own belief that if we had passed that bill and had been signed, that Donald Trump would never have been elected president of the United States. So I consider that an American tragedy that we haven't gotten it done. And people need to understand how important immigration is to this country. If you look at the history of our country economically, every single year, on average, we grow 3% a year. We go up, we go down, but on average, it's 3%. 2% of that is organic, 1% of that is immigration. So fully a third of the economic growth in this country is due to immigration. And when you think about the nature of the competition that we face right now with Beijing, just to pick one place, our economic self-interest means that we have to deal with this. And I'm continuing to work with Republicans to see if we can get any of them to pursue any aspects of immigration reform, most recently with a friend named Mike Crapo from Idaho on the agriculture provisions that I wrote in 2013, and the Farm Workers Union asked me to carry it for Democrats and find a Republican, which I was able to do, but I haven't been able to find another one because they're frankly in a party where their last president was somebody who began his campaign by riding his escalator down Trump Tower and calling Mexicans rapists, and he went on to win the presidency. He went on to win his nomination, went on to win the presidency. And I hope very strongly that once this election is over with, we're going to be able to get back to the negotiating table and figure out how to address this very, very serious problem that we have.
Thanks, Senator. Let's go back to our student panelists. This time we'll start with Nayeli.
As an undocumented student myself, I was left with little to no choice after DACA was put on hold. And even now with this new decision, that really leaves me to, again, no answer. And having to constantly depend on a system that would want me to leave 20 years to get a legal status without living in a place that I don't call home. With constant bills of immigration reform for all, like you mentioned, always being tossed out. Setting aside DACA from the broken immigration system we constantly put forward to fix, why has a solution for DACA and a solution, say, for my legal status not been set aside from the whole immigration system?
Did you came here when you were 2, right?
I did.
I read that. Look, it hasn't up till now because there was a hope that we were going to be able to do this comprehensively, and the Dreamers were saying, "Don't do anything for us that you're not doing for our parents." That is what people were saying. I think that if we could pass a Dream Act today by itself, we should try to do that, and we'll see whether we have the opportunity to do that in a lame duck session. As you know, mean, just what you just said, the court case makes it imperative that we get something done here, and that's why I think we should pass legislation that protects dreamers. I also, when Barack Obama actually began the DREAM Act, I had my staff in Colorado go out across Colorado and sign people up for this, for the Dreamer program. So that's another reason this is personal for me, and I really hope we can pass a law. 90% of the American people support doing the right thing for dreamers, and we should do it.
All right. Naomi, next question.
So I really kind of connect with you a little bit when you said that your parents were also immigrants here who had survived from Hitler, being that Hitler got his ideas of genocide from Andrew Jackson, who had slaughtered millions and millions of my people here in the United States. And here, my people, indigenous people, are considered to be just as worthless as immigrants, and we're treated just the same with as much, if not more, unequal rights. So my question to you is, within the system, how are you going to, A, honor those treaties, those ones such as Treaty of Fort Wise, Little Arkansas's Treaty, Treaty of Fort Laramie, the Ute Treaty of 1868, how are you going to honor those? Like step-by-step processes. If you're going to bring in my people, how are you going to bring in my people to get a seat at the table? And when it comes to getting those equal rights for us and the immigrants, how are you going to do that as well? We get that the system is broken, but what are you going to do to glue it together to make it more functional and adequate to assist us in getting, correct citizenship? America was built off immigration. Why did we stop?
Well, I think we stopped because, unfortunately, Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And historically, there has been, if you look historically, there are moments in the country's history when you have more liberal, with small l, liberal approaches to immigration, and then you have more conservative approaches. It kind of goes back and forth. And Donald Trump, I think, unfortunately, as I said, I think if we passed the bill in 2013, we wouldn't have elected him president, and these issues would have been dealt with. And what we will end up with very specifically is the stuff that I talked about earlier, those 4 components of the bill. I just want to mention that I was at the site of the Sand Creek Massacre 2 weeks ago with Deb Haaland, who's the first Native American Interior Secretary in America, and we were doubling the acreage at Sand Creek as a result of funding that I was able to get through appropriations packages. We also passed a record amount of money for water infrastructure in the infrastructure bill to try to meet treaty obligations that we have never met, to fulfill the unfilled need that Native Americans have had with respect to water in the Southwest, the Ute, Mountain Ute, and the Southern Ute tribes here in Colorado. And we got to keep pushing. It's interesting that you mentioned the Little Arkansas treaty. That was, without revealing what was discussed, when I had a meeting with Deb Haaland after the public session with the tribal leadership, there was a lot of discussion about that particular treaty and the way in which it was not being honored or needed to be honored. I will say there wasn't necessarily agreement among the tribal leaders about how we should fulfill that responsibility. But thank you very much for raising that.
Yeah, thank you.
Tarek?
Thank you, Sandra. While there are those with DACA, thousands of other immigrant youth are not able to get the work authorization and wait in limbo as well. What would you propose as a solution for all the youth whose future is on the line?
I think we have to pass comprehensive immigration reform. I think we've learned with DACA that there is not an administrative answer to this issue. We've got to figure out, we have to legislate. We've got to pass legislation. And I think we have to build a constituency for change in this country that demands that the legislation get passed. And I know people feel like this is taking much too long. I feel that way. I mean, this should have been done when you were 2 years old. It hasn't been done. Now there are people that are DACA recipients who are middle-aged, and there are other people that you're talking about, that until we create some sort of legal framework, we're never going to be able to solve the problem. And I really am, I've been committed to this the whole time that I've worked in the Senate, because I was, partly because of my mom's circumstances that I described earlier, but also because I was the superintendent of a school district that was 57% Latino, where many kids got to the 9th grade and realized back then that they would never have the chance to come to Metro because of their legal status. And we changed the law back then, but this is one of the, I think, when I think about the headwinds that our country faces, the income inequality I described earlier.
We're out of time.
Okay, this is one of those headwinds that we've got to address.
Brian, your question.
Thank you.
My question has to deal with the most recent events, such as Texas and Florida. What they have done is human trafficking, taking immigrants to other strongholds, such as California, Massachusetts, to bring awareness to the immigration issue that they're claiming is a problem. And when you're creating policy, are you going to be able to hold those states accountable for human trafficking? Because I'm a little concerned, as Colorado is very purple, and I'm wondering, suddenly Texas might be sending a buckload into Denver and then dropping it off.
Right. They've certainly threatened that. The governor of Texas has threatened that. The governor of Florida has threatened that. You know, when under the Trump administration, there was that massive separation of children from their parents at the border. My mom called me. She doesn't call me very often, but she called me and she said, you know, I see myself in these kids, because she was separated from her parents for 3 years during the World War II, and she believed her parents were killed, that she'd been told they were killed. And I can tell you this, as her son, this stuff has intergenerational effects. It doesn't just, it's not just the person who's faces that trauma that deals with it. It goes on for generations. And that's why, you know, these guys that are sending these people across state lines are not actually trying to fix the issue. They're just trying to create, you know, commotion to try to support themselves politically and galvanize their base. My opponent in this race, by the way, supports what they've done. He says that he thinks, I don't know if he said that here, but that's what he said out on the campaign trail. It's another reason why we have to fix our broken immigration system.
All right, we're back to our student panelists. Any follow-up questions for the senator?
I really appreciate how much importance you say is going into this, and again, trying to glue back this broken immigration system, but really having to, someone mentioned in the last interview, trying to build the immigration system from the ground up, which merely seems impossible and a long time to wait. And so really, what obstacles have been stopping Congress from really getting to a point where either updating the irrational laws that we have for people to come into the country, even without taking into consideration allegations of children being kept in cages at the border and being kept from their families, what would you say would be a way to push forward these options without having it to be kicked out all over again?
I think that we don't have to kick it all over again. What we had in 2013 that we don't have today is a Republican Party in the form of John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and Jeff Flake, who believed that the Republicans would never elect another president unless they helped fix the immigration system. That's what they believed. And what happened instead was Trump, I'm not going to repeat it again, but Trump came down his escalator and said what he said and went on to win the nomination and went on to win the presidency. And so now it's hard to find a Republican in Washington, D.C. who actually work on these issues because for fear of Donald Trump. And I'm not I'm not excusing that. I'm just explaining why we are where we are.
1
And
minute.
we don't have to rip out our immigration system root and branch or start over. That's not what we have to do. We have to create a pathway for the 11 million people that are here. We've got to get the DACA kids in a position where they're legal and on a pathway to citizenship. We've got to straighten out all the other visa issues that make it so hard for people to go back and forth, you know, to their home country and come back to the United States and work, like in agriculture. And we've got to make sure the American people know that their border is secure, and that the immigration policies in this nation at the border and elsewhere are humane. And that's what I've fought for the whole time that I'll be in the Senate, and that's what I'm going to continue to fight for.
Any more follow-up questions from our student panel?
Yes. Thank you for addressing how you are continuing to work to push through the treaties and honor them in the ways that they need to be, especially with Deb Haaland. Truly one of the most remarkable role models I've ever seen in my time, you know, here on Earth so far. So definitely appreciative of that. However, I know that was a lot of content in my last question, but we didn't get to answer the part where the plan that you want to put in place in order to also, you know, really honor those immigrants and equal rights, because they're here under all these circumstances. So they go through a lot of exploitive processes where they end up not being able to like have great working conditions, like being sprayed with pesticides or overworked or sexually harassed, and they can't say anything because they'll get deported
Right.
because somebody's going to call HR on them,
Right.
you know? And those are also indigenous people to this land, regardless what their society has taught them to be. They are still indigenous to this land as well. And that's very important to me, is honoring them. So what laws are you fighting for to push that they don't have to worry about getting deported, for reporting things like that, and for fighting for a safe, healthy working environment?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. To be very specific, the Farm Work Modernization Act is the name of the law that passed the House of Representatives with we are negotiating things like pay, working conditions, the ability of people to be able to sue their employer if they need to sue their employer to redress their rights. That's an issue. It's interesting you put your finger on that, because that is an issue that is there's a lot of disagreement about, you know, but that's been one of the things that, you know, the farm workers who I've been working with on this legislation have said is very important to them. So we've continued to push on that. With respect to, you know, tribes, I do think that the massive investments in this is not an issue of immigration status, but an issue of trying to honor the commitments that have been made. The billions of dollars for water infrastructure that we put in the infrastructure bill that I wrote this bill. I can't remember the name of it, but I wrote it with Martin Heinrich and a couple others. This is a big step forward to try and, at least in that limited aspect of our government-to-government relationship, to honor the commitment that has not yet been fulfilled.
Tarek.
Senator Bennett, you claim Trump started the separation from children on the border. However, after doing some investigation, I found out it actually started underneath the Obama administration, and it is continued by the Biden administration. Both parties are to blame. However, why are you painting it as a Republican problem?
Well, the question I was asked was what intervening event happened that changed the politics so that we couldn't pass immigration reform? And I think an honest answer to that is that Donald Trump's election in this country is on an anti-immigrant platform is what led to the changes in that politics. I agree with you that these have been issues that every administration has had to deal with. I think the Trump administration took it to an entirely different level.
All right. Now it is time for challenge number 3. Senator Bennet, what do you see as America's role in global affairs today, and how will you work to maintain America's global leadership over the next 6 years?
We have a very, very important role to play. I was at the very end of the year, I took my first trip since COVID overseas. I hadn't been anywhere with other senators. This wasn't a vacation, wasn't a family vacation. And we went to the Middle East, and we went to Qatar, and we went to Israel, and then we went to Europe and to several different democracies. And every single democracy I visited, the leaders that I was talking to were saying, we are deeply worried about the rise of political extremism. We're deeply worried about the rise of anti-Semitism in the European countries. We're deeply worried about the way social media is pulling people apart from one another, making it hard for us to be able to solve issues as a democracy that challenge us. And on one level, I thought, well, that's kind of comforting because those sound like challenges that we have as well. And they are challenges that we have as well. What was very clear to me is their expectation is that we're going to provide the leadership. And that was before Putin invaded Ukraine. I'm on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, and for 18 months, we've been able to see as Putin has made one mistake after another, partly because of who he is, but also partly because of the nature of his totalitarian system, which won't tell him the truth about anything. And it has been really inspiring to me to see people living in democracies all over the world, inspired by the bravery of the Ukrainian people, saying, do more, do more, do more. And it's going to be the United States that has to lead that effort. I also think we have a very important role with respect to the autocratic regime in China. When I was your age, and Beijing was entering the global economy, and what everybody said was, not everybody, but the United States policy was, well, China's going to liberalize because they're going to be part of the global order. China's going to change the way they do their economic practices. None of that turned out to be true, which is an important thing for you guys to keep in mind, because a lot of stuff that is predicted about the future turns out not to be true. And in this case, it wasn't true. And when I was graduating from college in 1987, that's when Ronald Reagan, basically started to say, let's privilege people in our society who want to make stuff as cheaply as possible in Southeast Asia and in China over lots of other decisions we could have made about our supply chain and about our national security and about having an economy that when it grew, grows for everybody, so we wouldn't have the massive income inequality that we have today and the massive lack of economic mobility, both of which I think are major threats to our democracy. So we have a decision about how we want to compete with the state-sponsored capitalism in China, and I think that's going to give us the opportunity to build an economy in this country where people actually think they have a chance again, if they're working hard, that they're going to be able to move their families forward. And that is going to also require us to be in partnership with countries throughout our hemisphere, in Latin America and in Canada and in Europe and even in Southeast Asia, to demonstrate that democracy can compete effectively with authoritarianism, and that the world isn't going to be dominated by a unipolar world dominated by China. So we have a fundamentally important role to play, and I would say the most important thing we need to do, if we're going to play that role, is get our act together. Because we can't do that if we've got a healthcare system. If we have a healthcare system where we're leaving millions of people out. We can't do it if we've got an economy where when it grows just for the top 10% and nobody else. I tell you, we cannot do it if we have an education system that's reinforcing the income inequality we have as a nation, but that's what we have today, because the best predictor of the quality of a kid's education is their parents' income. And we surely can't do it if we have a broken immigration system that doesn't allow our economy to grow. So I think I think there is no shortage of challenges for us to address, and that's one of the reasons I want to go back.
Now we're going to go back to our student panel, and we will start with Nayeli this time.
So with recent events of protests in Iran from women fighting for a say in their lives and tragically ending up dead. And as America's recent decision on Roe versus Wade being overturned, what would your stand be in growing a woman's voice in global affairs to help voice these situations and back these approaches with your team?
Well, I think it is, we over many years, we've said that we stand for freedom and democracy. Sometimes we've fallen short, at home and abroad as well. I think that the most important thing that we could do here to show that we still stand for freedom is codify Roe versus Wade at the national level. We have to do that. I think in order to do that, we have to elect a pro-choice majority in the House and a pro-choice majority in the Senate in Washington, D.C. The president has said that if we're able to do that, that we will find a way to codify Roe versus Wade. I think with respect to Iran, there's limits to what we can do, but what we can do is sanction the regime for their repressive activity, both in Iran itself, with respect to the Iranian women that you're talking about, and also the malevolent behavior they're doing all over the region in the Middle East.
Almost out of time.
Okay.
All right. Tarek, your
you,
question.
You said you stopped by a couple democratic countries in the Middle East, including Israel.
No, in Europe, the democracy.
Oh, okay.
In Europe,
Okay.
the democracies in Europe, not the Middle East.
Okay. When you were in Israel, did you have a chance to propose solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict currently going on?
No, we didn't propose solutions. We said that we believe that the conflict needs to be that the outcome needs to be a two-state solution where the Palestinians and the Israelis negotiate that solution, that it shouldn't be something that is forced upon anybody. I met with young students in the Palestinian territories while I was there and had the chance to listen to their perspective as well, in addition to meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel and the Foreign Minister of Israel too. So this is another place where I think the United States can play a constructive role to try to build on the Abraham Accords and see if we can establish better relationships in the region so that we actually can get to a place where a two-state solution is possible.
All right.
Thank you.
Now we'll take Brian.
I see that you supported the Chips and Science Act. Is there any bills that is very similar to it for other industries like the agriculture or the auto industry to be able to allow us bring those factory jobs back to the United States to help us actually become more self-sufficient?
So that is a much more efficient way of saying what I was trying to say earlier. That's what we have to do to be able to create an economy that when it grows, grows for everybody. That's what we need to do. And I would say the closest thing, and I think the CHIPS Act is exciting because that is one of those industries that in the 80s we just let go. And as a result, 95% of the most significant semiconductors that are in that are in our fighter jets and our submarines and our surface ships are all made in Taiwan, 110 miles off the coast of mainland China. So bringing that back is really good. I think the thing that's closest to it, is the Inflation Reduction Act, which is represents the most significant investment in climate and in wind and solar manufacturing and carbon capture technology. Combination of that with our existing resources is going to put us in a position to export all over the world, and I think that's going to be very exciting.
Naomi.
So it's safe to say, as an Indigenous person, that Indigenous people worldwide, whether that be Palestinians or Brazilians, Brazilian tribes, Costa Rican tribes, Australian tribes, any of that sort, that you had mentioned that we can't force solutions upon people or force them to do things, yet we're forced to live every single day as the most underrepresented minority in the world. And that's here and that's everywhere else in the world as well. So that's traumatizing from having to see that attempted genocide be relived every single day, everywhere throughout the world. So what are we going to do to change that? What are we going to do to continue with reparations? How are we going to start to uphold those reparations on a daily basis? How are we going to encourage other countries, or I guess in this case, since we're staying out of their business this time around, that we actually sit here and lead that conversation, we lead that trend in upholding reparations due to those people throughout the world?
Well, I think I have to answer it the same way, which is I think that no peace that in that region that we attempt to force is going to be successful. I don't think there's any way for us to do that. I think this country has to stand for democracy. We have to stand for human rights. We have to stand for equality. We've got to give hope to people around the world, and we need to be true. We need to be true to that mission. And there have been times when we weren't true to that mission, and there are a lot of people that have given up hope as a result of that. I don't give up hope because I know how incredibly difficult the struggle has been to get even where we are today. You know, like I think you can draw a straight line from slavery to Jim Crow to the redlining in our housing and our banking industry to the mass incarceration that we have today as a country, and to the deep educational inequities that exist in the United States of America. What I just said about Black Americans, one could say about Native Americans as well. And we need to understand that history to redress the challenges that we face. And to me, one of the staggering things about America today is that the wealth gap between Black Americans and white Americans is bigger than it was when I was your age.
1 minute.
And so but we can't give up. We have to continue to try. I think the effort that we talked about in the first question about housing is a way to acknowledge the fact that there's a massive wealth gap in our state because some people have been able to pursue home ownership, and a lot of people of color in our state have never been able to pursue home ownership. And trying to close that gap is just, you know, a modest thing that we need to address.
All right. Do our student panelists have some follow-up questions for the senator? Tarek.
Senator Bennet, you claim you want a two-state solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. However, you have supported the Israeli Boycott Act, which does not allow companies to boycott Israeli from its atrocities committed against the Palestinian people. Our country also sells billions of dollars of weapons to the Israeli government that they use to slaughter thousands of kids. And we see this month after month on CNN, on Fox News. So what will you do to help the Palestinian people have a voice in this world?
Well, I think it's very important for the Palestinian people to have a voice in this world. And it's one of the reasons why, you know, I helped restore the aid that Donald Trump cut when he was president of the United States. You know, he sucked millions of dollars out of the territories that we've now put back in as an attempt to be able to support small businesses in the Palestinian territories and hopefully ultimately support economic development that can help stabilize institutions in the West Bank and help create conditions for a successful negotiation with Israel.
All right, Naomi.
So I understand when you had said that we can't step in, we can't force things, and I completely understand that. That wasn't my question. My question was, how are we going to set the example by restoring those reparations? I'm sorry, by starting those reparations to the indigenous people here on this land to set the example for the rest of the world? We can't necessarily interfere, but if we set that example, I believe it'll have a domino effect. So what are we going to do? Like, is that policy planning? How are you going to bring my people to the table to get those reparations started as soon as possible? Because we can get them to the table, but how are you going to do it?
I think that you're asking a question that I hope your generation of Americans is going to help us answer. That's what I really believe about that. I support the legislation in Washington to create a commission to study the reparations question. And that bill, as I understand it, relates only to Black Americans. I've said when I ran for president in the last time that I thought it should be extended to indigenous people as well, to Native Americans as well. But that's only I just want to be clear, that's just a study of how to think about this, because this idea is so new to our domestic political system, and it's going to require us to have lots of debates. One of the things that's really surprised me, and I'm saying this not to make excuses for anybody, one of the things that's really surprised me being there is how hard it is to make progress in a democracy, just how difficult it is to make progress in a democracy. And sometimes I hear people your age say, why should we vote if the system is so corrupt? Why should we vote if the system is so bankrupt? And I think the answer to that is, the more corrupt you think the system is, the more obligated you should be to vote, because that's how you set priorities, that's how you make changes, that's how people in elected positions actually have to respond to you. And when I think about somebody like John Lewis subjecting his skull to the billy clubs on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the sake of our democracy, it gives you a sense of how hard this actually is. When you think about the fact that it took women 100 years to win the self-evident right to vote, it gives you a sense of how hard that is. And I'm not saying it should take that long. I don't think it should take that long. But I am saying it is that hard. And I hope that people, that are listening to this program, the more difficult you think it is, the more corrupt you think it is, the more you have to show up. Because you live in a state where people actually have the right to vote and have a system of voting that actually I wish the whole country had. There are other places in America where the vote is being suppressed, and for that reason alone, we have the obligation to vote.
That's all the time we have. I want to thank our panelists and also you, Senator Bennet, for joining us.
Thank you, Chandra. I appreciate it, and thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
The Solution Studio is a project of the MSU Denver Institute for Public Service in partnership with the Colorado Latino Leadership Advocacy and Research Organization, the Colorado League of Women Voters, and New Voice Strategies. I'm Chandra Whitfield. Happy voting.
Thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely.